Now, for my is Edgar Degas Jack the Ripper theory, I've done a ton of research, and I've talked in the past about how much I've used this book, Little Dancer Age 14, as a source. And so I wanted to go back and look at all of the research that she did and start reading her source material. And one of the pieces that she used heavily was Degas and his model. There is an English translation for this, and it is horrifying. This book is really interesting. It's a tell-all that was written shortly after Degas' death as they were selling off all of his artworks for record sums of money. It's all about one of his models and how she used to pose for him and how he used to treat her. Her name in the story is Pauline, and she appears to be some sort of conglomerate of several of his different models. The book was supposedly written by Elise Miquel, and nobody really knows for sure who she was, but there's a foreword in the front that speculates on who her identity could have been. It's a pretty short book because it was actually just published as 2 separate news articles, but it's far from pleasant reading. I was only 5 pages in before Degas first hits Pauline. The model posed and rested with no further commentary from Degas. She had begun to think that perhaps his mood had softened when he brought a fist down on her back so hard that she nearly fell. "Your posing is so terrible, you'll make me die of apoplexy," he said, wheezing. And then, if I wasn't horrified enough, it then launches into a discussion of how he's ending the session using his compass, an instrument he handled ineptly at best, jerking it back and forth over his poor models' bodies. It was a miracle he'd never put out anyone's eye. And then there were the scrapes and scratches its points dug across you. No matter how nimbly the models tried to avoid them, they weren't always lucky enough to escape the session unharmed, and more than one had left the atelier with a red slash running the length of an arm or a leg. So for context, let me show you what a reduction compass looks like. These aren't meant to be used on humans, these are architectural tools, but he was using them to measure body parts. And because Pauline's story began sometime after 1900, we know that Degas' blindness was pretty near total at this point. He could no longer focus on anything in his focal point. He only had peripheral vision at best. He was relying more and more upon putting his hands physically upon the bodies of the models. He also, on top of touching them and hitting them obviously, was using these reduction compasses to measure their proportions and then reduce them to the size of the scale model he was making of them. But they were pointy and they were sharp. So whilst looking for evidence to disprove my hypothesis that Degas was Jack the Ripper, finding out that his models occasionally left the studio bleeding, well, it really just didn't help anything.